Many scientists state that mankind will evolve and become more intelligent as time goes on. But, in reality, it's not true. So many people only think about reproduction without thinking about how human life will be. In 2005, there was an experiment to freeze people in sleep so the country could save the best quality people when they are needed in the future. Joe and Rita were the people who were chosen to be the subject of this experiment. Joe was chosen based on his personality, which is average compared to others. Furthermore, Joe also doesn't have anyone in a relationship. Meanwhile, Rita was chosen because there were no other suitable female subjects for the experiment. Rita was a call girl who got into a mountain of debt to a pimp. The pimp ordered Rita to become the investigation subject so he could get legal freedom from the crime he committed. When the experiment is about to start, Joe gets acquainted with Rita. She tells him that she is an artist and has a boyfriend who asked her to become the subject of the experiment. Joe trusted what Rita said despite her lie. At first, the experiment will be carried out for 1 year. But, the military authorities in the experiment were arrested, and the experiment was eventually forgotten. Year after year, mankind becomes more stupid. Scientists even focus solely on preventing hair loss and lengthening erections. This phenomenon continues until mankind can't even solve the simplest problem, which is garbage. The accumulated trash eventually leads to the biggest garbage avalanche. Joe finally wakes up in an unknown house due to the garbage avalanche that carried him. He is confused by all the weirdness he sees. The people he meets do not speak English very well. When Joe talks with an ordinary voice, people think he is weird, arrogant, and consider to make a fuss. Joe then goes to the hospital for treatment because he thinks all the weird things happens because of the drug during the experiment. In the hospital, everything seems to be a mess. The registration staff looks confused when Joe talks to him. Joe tries to get some water from the sink, but it contains electrolytes. Joe asked another staff member about the sink, and it turns out that water is now only used for the toilets. After that, Joe is asked to use a weird machine to diagnose him. At that time Joe finds an oddity where the date on the magazine shows the year 2505 but ignores it. He finally meets the doctor, who says that Joe's condition is very bad without any logical explanation. The doctor then gives Joe the bill and asks Joe to scan his tattoo. Apparently, everyone now has a tattoo as their respective identity. The bill's date also shows the year 2505, and Joe finally realizes that he is literally in the year 2505. The doctor looks scared, knowing Joe doesn't have a tattoo on his hand, and calls the police to arrest Joe, but Joe escaped from the hospital before being arrested. In the middle of the city, Joe sees many weird things. The economy is in dire straits, a great dust ball has become food supply, and the country's #1 movie, namely Ass. Joe finds a vending machine and tries to get some food. The police see and arrest him because Joe doesn't pay his hospital bill and doesn't have a UPC tattoo. In the police car, Joe sees what he thinks is Rita's pod. Joe is brought to court. Unfortunately for him, justice in this era is not only blind but also retarded. On the court, he is assisted by a lawyer named Frito. Frito doesn't defend Joe but instead blamed Joe for destroying his house when he was carried away by the garbage avalanche. It turns out that the house Joe was awakened in was Frito's house. Joe tries to explain what he has been through logically, and as expected all people just laugh at him. Finally, Joe is sentenced to prison by the judge. Meanwhile, Rita finally wakes up. As time goes by, she finds that her job is getting easier because people become morons. A random guy walks toward her, and Rita fools him by teasing him to wait and give her money. When Rita gets the money, she looks confused because she thinks there has been a major change in 1 year. Oh boy, she definitely does not realize yet that it is not 1 year since she slept inside the pod. Joe is taken to the Identify Processing Program of America to get an identification and a tattoo. The machine asks for Joe's name and instead misunderstands that Joe's name is not sure. Joe tries to restart the machine, but the machine already prints the tattoo. After the identification process, Joe is taken to the IQ test. Joe is confused because the IQ test is really easy. Other people seem to have a hard time doing it. In prison, Joe sees many people trying to eat. Joe also sees big people who sit on another guy. The big guy pointed at Joe as if waiting to sit on Joe. Desperate and scared, Joe uses his superior intelligence to make the best escape plan he can think of. Joe starts to talk to the guard if he is in the wrong place because he has finished his sentence and should be out of jail. Supposed to be in from the prison. The guard just believes what Joe said and lets Joe go. Another guard checks but don't find Joe on the list of prisoners who are about to leave the prison. Joe asks the guard to recheck the list. When the guard is rechecking, Joe runs out of prison. Breaking from prison has never been this easy. Joe goes to Frito's house and forcibly enters. Frito gets mad and asks Joe to leave. But, Joe blames Frito because he makes innocent people get into prison and scares Frito by saying that Frito can also go to prison for what he has done. As we can guess, the far more intellectual Joe manages to make Frito starts to believe him. Joe then asks Frito if there is a time machine that can bring him back to the past. Joe becomes desperate to see Frito confused because he doesn't understand what he is saying. Unexpectedly, Frito says that there is a time machine, but it is very expensive. Joe thinks hard and tries to convince Frito to take him to the time machine until finally, he is willing to help Joe because he hopes to get a lot of money from him. Police start knocking and ask Frito about Joe, making them both run from the house. Joe and Frito start to look for Rita around the city. Rita still fools the random guy before and gets money by only asking the guy to wait day to day like a dog. When the random guy leaves, Joe and Frito meet Rita and immediately take Rita with Frito's car. Rita gets scared because there are so many police chasing them. Luckily, they can hide in the dust storm. Joe explains everything to Rita, that they had been asleep for 500 years and there is a time machine to get back to the past. Rita starts to worry because she is scared that her pimp will look for her to get his money. Joe, who thinks the pimp is Rita's boyfriend, gets confused about why a woman can have debt to her boyfriend. Rita says that her boyfriend is also her manager. In the middle of that conversation, Joe's tattoo gets scanned accidentally. Frito's car battery is turned off by police for carrying Joe. The police then start firing at Frito's car brutally. But as we expected, a stupid policeman fires a bazooka and hit a plane. Due to the lack of intelligence, many people became riotous seeing it, and so do Frito for a moment. Joe then asks Frito to go away from that place. They then continue to look for the time machine. Rita looks distrustful of Frito because he looks stupid. Joe then tells Rita how he met Frito, which confirms her suspicion. Somehow, Frito seems convinced that they should go to Costco because the time machine might be there. When they reach Costco, it is not like Costco Joe and Rita used to know. It looks very big and very messy. Frito tells them about his experiences in Costco, like studying law. Apparently, Costco now offers anything. Joe even sees that Starbucks has now not only a place to quench your thirst but also to quench your lust. They finally reach the station inside and need to wait for the train. Rita asks if she can go to the toilet first. Out of nowhere, Frito tells Joe that he loves doing things with women and starts doing weird things. Joe wants to stop Frito and accidentally gets scanned again. The train arrived, but the police starts chasing Joe. Frito already gets into the train and asks Joe to get in too. Joe feels that he can't leave Rita alone, so he thinks of a lot of things that he can do to help Rita in many other ways. The train has started running, and Joe is finally caught by the police. Rita looks at Joe getting arrested and decides to hide. Joe is then taken to the White House. Joe is being explained about himself by the ministers of the country. It turns out that the result of Joe's IQ test got the attention of the highest level of government. The result says that Joe is the smartest person in the world. It makes Joe become the Minister of Interior. Even all the ministers are stupid like other people. But as we already know, the test was just too easy because the average intelligence of the people has gone down far. Joe also said that he can't become the Minister of Interior because he doesn't even know what that is. The president finally enters the room. You may ask, who is the current president? He is a 5-time SmackDown champion and also a porn superstar. Well, not too surprising if we look at the quality of the people who vote for him. He is just as absurd as the others. The president then holds a press conference and says that he will make changes for the country. People get mad because the president said that last time and nothing happened. I guess politician never changes, despite the era. Looking at the reaction of the people, the president gets mad and starts to fire a gun, making the mad mass scared. The president then proceeds to try convincing them that this time it will work because they have Joe, the smartest man in the world. President says that Joe will think of solutions to all the country's problems, like growing plants, fixing the dust storms, and healing the economy. He also says that Joe is able to do all that things in just 1 week. Everyone gets happy and trusts the president. But Joe becomes confused because he doesn't know what to do. If he can't do that, he will be punished again. In the middle of the meeting with all of the ministers, Frito comes as Joe asked. Joe then asks Frito again about the time machine, but he can't understand what Frito is talking about, so he asks Frito to draw a map. Joe then returns to the meeting and asks them to look for Rita because he needs her to fix the country's problem, somehow. At that time, Joe's mind is only fixated on looking for Rita and going to the time machine before anything else escalated again. Waiting for results, Joe then starts to see the crop's condition. The land is dry, and no crop grows. Joe calls Frito for the map that he requested. The police find Rita and tell Joe that Rita keeps charging people for money by fooling them. Joe asks to talk to her alone to explain his plan. He then opens the map, which still looks confusing. In the middle of confusion, Joe realizes the crops won't grow because they water them with electrolytes, just like when he tried to drink at the hospital. It turns out that the electrolytes company have replaced all the food with electrolytes because of this. With this, accidentally found a solution to one of the country's problems. Joe finally decided to lead the change by changing electrolytes with water. Other ministers denied Joe's ideas because they didn't understand the logic. Joe makes an unlogical explanation that he can talk to the plant, and the plant wants water, not electrolytes. The ministers finally trust him. I guess you have to think stupidly to convince stupid people. After some time, suddenly, people become mad and anarchic. They start to attack the White House. The share of the electrolytes company stock has decreased, and many people got fired. They blame Joe for it and want him to get punished. They decide to give him one night of rehabilitation, which turns out to be a torture arena. Joe can't escape this time because he is tied to a big rock. Joe asks Rita to go to the time machine by herself and leave him. After watching the rehabilitation, Rita can't go alone and decides to help Joe. Rita realizes that the crop is starting to grow. Meanwhile, Joe must defeat 2 monster trucks using a small car, part of the rehabilitation program. In the middle of the fight, Rita comes to the rehabilitation place. She tries to inform the president about the crop. The president doesn't believe what Rita said and continues the fight. Luckily, Joe can survive the fight because the big rock saves him. Both monster trucks crash each other. After the crash, another fighter comes back and fights Joe with grenade launcher. Rita sees big monitors on the arena, so she asks the cameraman to follow Frito to go where the plants are by offering some money. Then, Rita fools the monitor operator into getting control of the monitor. With her highly average intelligence, it's all easy. Meanwhile, the fighter is enjoying scaring Joe with the grenade launcher. Simultaneously, Frito and the cameraman already reach where the crop is. Unfortunately, near the place, there is Starbuck, which teases them to quench their lust. Joe runs for his life by avoiding the explosions and reaches the microphone. He gives a speech and explains that he just wants to help people by growing crops with water. But they just laugh at him. The fighter continues to shoot at him using a flamethrower. When Frito and the cameraman finish at Starbuck, Frito remembers what he needs to do and starts to record the plant with the camera. Rita spotlighted what Frito records and shows them on the monitor. Joe hangs by the microphone and almost gets burned because of the flamethrower. Luckily, the president notices the monitor and saves Joe by stopping the rehabilitation program. All people become happy when they see the plant on the monitor. The president also gives Joe freedom from punishment. After the tragedy, a party is held to appreciate Joe for growing plants. Joe feels happy because he can finally go back to the time machine. Rita decides to stay in the year 2505 because she has a better life here. Tricking people has never been so easy for her. She also gets a position as CEO of Starbuck, considering her skill. After saying goodbye to Rita, the president announces that Joe will be the vice president. Joe feels terrible because he wants to go back. All people convince Joe to stay and help them to solve their problems. Finally, Joe decides to stay too. After all, it turns out that the time machine that Frito said is a fun ride, not a real time machine. After a couple of years, Joe finally becomes the president and Frito the vice president. Rita also becomes Joe's wife. They have children who become the smartest kids in the world. A beacon for humanity to restore their glorious era. What would you do if become the smartest person in the world? Please tell us your comment down below. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like and comment to help the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.